Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lightshare Academy. This is episode 2. I'm here with the boys, Dom and Adrian, and we're going to talk a little bit more about perspective today. So, the subject that I want to talk about today is mirroring. We will, if you guys haven't watched the last episode, we did cover these funky ass looking things here called perspective grid and field of view. It's important to understand these before you understand mirroring, and I highly advise you guys to go back and watch it if you haven't. But with that in mind, let's go ahead and move on. What is mirroring, right? Mirroring is, as the name suggests, the idea of having one object on one side of a imaginary plane and mirror it across that, right? As if you were a little bit, and as if you were a mirror. And the idea for this is to create symmetrical objects. As we know, most of man-made stuff are symmetrical objects. What I do mostly, like vehicles and props, pretty much 80 to 90% of them are symmetrical objects. And the ability to be able to visualize correctly how they would look in 3D space on a simple line drawing, to me, is essential, just because then you can actually communicate how things look like. One thing that I see a lot of is people that don't quite know how to mirror something, and they present a sketch to the client. And when the client tries to do that in 3D, that doesn't quite work, right? Because, on 2D, it kind of looked like you had, I don't know, two spheres here. And then one is bigger than the other on the sketch. And the sketch proportions look super nice because it's 2D and all of that. And then when you get to the 3D stage where you have to actually build the thing, everything is out of place. The proportions are not the same anymore. And basically, you are not actually communicating what you wanted to communicate in the first place. Of course, nowadays we have 3D, and people should use 3D to make it that much easier for them to start the design or keep it accurate enough. But also something else that this kind of skill set will allow you to do is it will give you freedom to be able to modify the 3D as you wish without being fearful of it being out of proportion, out of scale, or whatever it is that it happened. Now, jumping to the technique itself, right? As I was mentioning, imagine that you have a little grid here. Okay, this is the equivalent of a 3D grid, the things that we were talking about last week. In terms of precision, this is not precise at all. It's a handmade grid. This is precise enough for a sketch, but not necessarily something that you would make extremely accurate. I'll show you guys later on how to make something a bit more accurate as well. But the idea is that throughout this 3D grid, just like in any 3D software, you have a bunch of little dots, right? These little dots, when you connect them together, they form a line, just like the... I'm talking about 3D a lot just because this is 3D, right? That's what I want people to get the grasp of, is the fact that what I'm doing here right now is the same thing as we do in 3D software. It's just that the 3D software will give you, as an example in Blender, it will give you a modifier that will mirror things for you. And I'll jump real quick in Blender afterwards to show you guys how we can make sure that this technique actually works, right? The idea is that you have your lines, and then you have a little plane here, then you have other dots here, and then maybe a cylinder on the corner here. And if you're doing this, then maybe you consider that it's worthwhile to extend your grid a little bit more. So you are drawing things, right? And now you want to mirror them over. The way that you do that is you need to find a center point between the object that you want to mirror on one side and the equivalent of that on the other side, right? The center point, in my case, this line is basically the center point. So I need to equate everything to that, right? Basically, I need to find this distance here and then duplicate that over.
Question.
Now, yeah.
So this is all happening on same line, right? You don't have to make a brand new perspective line when you mirror.
Yeah, it depends, right? So basically, I'm arbitrarily choosing that to the fact that this line is actually on the same plane as this one. So they are sitting on the same plane here, right? If this was not sitting on the same plane, which is what happened with this one, then we will need to find the equivalent of that. So mirroring one line here, right? I will need to follow like the grid here to find where the lands. So this is the distance here. In theory, you can just estimate, right? Based on how long this is, how long that will be on the other side. But another thing that you can do to make it more precise is that like you extend this a little bit more, and then you extend this a little bit more, following the vertical line that we established earlier. Let me actually pick another color because I think it will be easier for us to see. So the center point, the point that I want to mirror, and then I start to extend those lines over. And then I will extend it upwards just so I have another reference point, right? So it doesn't matter. I could extend it here. I could extend it all the way over here. I could extend downwards. It really doesn't matter as long as it's following the grid. And the reason why it's good to know that it doesn't matter is because when you're trying to do a perspective drawing that is very complicated, you end up with like very little space to extend those lines to. So sometimes you extend them out of the drawing just to make it easier for you to actually calculate those lines. So let's say that I have like a bunch of lines here that I was already mirroring, right? If I try to mirror this and it's like, oh, I can't really see what I'm doing, I could just extend it like all downwards and do the mirroring process down here, you know? It's just, everything is like relative to where you arbitrarily are choosing to put those lines. So I choose to extend it over here, and then I will just drag this line following again the perspective grid all the way until it touches this one. And then what I'll do here is I'll draw an X, right? This is the X. Again, not a perfect case, right? So it will be janky just to show the technique, but the idea is that you draw an X here to find the center point, and then you extend this thing over. And now you have like the relative point here, which is this one. This is relative to this, right? And then you'll mirror that across that center line. So the idea is that you draw a line that goes from here, crosses that, and it touches this point. Because if I do the same but in reverse, if I do from the bottom upwards, I'll find that spot over there. So this is how you calculate as precisely as possible how to mirror like one little point. And it's all extending lines from the one point that you are sure that is on that center line. So the only point that I know for sure it's on the center line is this one, because they are sitting on the same plane. Now I'm using that to mirror all other ones. How I would mirror this other one, it's what Dom asked, right? Do I need to create other lines? The same thing that I did here with like, oh, I'll extend the point that I know for sure. So it's all based on like extensions of things that you are sure about, right? Now, I would extend this backwards to find the relationship between this and this, right? So, oh, this is where they touch. And these lines that I'm drawing, they are following the grid, right? Like both this one and this one, they're following the grid. I'm not like arbitrarily choosing the direction or the size of them or like where they land. It's just like where they are pointing to. Now I know like, oh, the point on the ground, the point on this plane that this dot here occupies is this one. And then it's the same thing as we did here, right? Because now what I did, I just established that this thing is basically the equivalent of this one for the bottom dot, right? Now it's the same deal. Like you just go across, find the point, go up, and across again. And then you find the center point.
This is all in two.
It works. It's actually like funny that you asked that because we
It
don't really
doesn't
know
matter,
what
right?
perspective this is because I took the grid out of my ass, you know? Like I invented this grid. Is like if it was a 3-point perspective, the only difference is that these lines are not like completely vertical. And they're not completely vertical on the example either, you know. So just to finish that that little sketch there, right? I would just cross, go up. This is where that point lands. So this line here that I sketched before, I think this is probably a bit too light. This line here is actually the line between this point and that point, which is this. So all of these like red and blue lines, they're actually not in the final drawing. They're just tools for me to measure how the green line will mirror across the plane. Now, do you need to be this complicated every time that you're doing a sketch? You actually don't. And the idea is that with this knowledge, you'll be able to make informed decisions about the things that you want to make, right? Now, if we're doing a 3-point perspective, so like, oh, let's say that I'm looking like up on something, right? So like this is the fake grid this time around. The only difference is that like now the points are kind of like here. We still need to find the center line, right? So let's arbitrarily choose that this is the center line for like this dot here. Any point that this point connects to, I can find out based on this grid, right? So let's say that you have a line that does this, and let's assume that it's in 3D is kind of like coming out of the page a little bit more. So this is more towards the center. What you would do is you would kind of like, okay, this is the center. I go up, I mirror this across that, right? So mirror this across that line, go back down again. So you kind of like find all of those points, you know, because I know that
Looking
this
upwards, right?
Yeah, I know that this center line here is equivalent to this point. So I just like go back. Wait, where is the... Okay, so this is the line there. So like this is the difference between them. And then I find the equivalent of that going upwards. So this is the center point of the dot that we want to find out. Now I just mirror that across the center point. I'm guesstimating here, which is what I would do on a regular sketch. So like, this is the size of this line. It's kind of like same thing, but a little bit less. And then I would estimate like, this is where it lands. And then for this one, I'll do a similar thing, right? Follow the grid, find it, similar line, and then you mirror that across that plane. And now if we want to make the mirror of this be a full plane, like this is that plane. And it really doesn't matter the kind of grid that you're using, as long as you understand the technique. It's points on a grid, right? That's what you're mirroring. Because people tend to think of like extra complicated things, like the cylinder, right? The cylinder, it's nothing but a collection of points that you will mirror, and that will find the equivalent of them on the other side, right? Like this point will be there, and this one will be there, you know? It's like, it's the same thing. Everything's constructed by those points. The same way that in 3D, everything that we construct is made by vertices. Now, this is extremely dry, right? This is extremely dry content, but the idea, just for you guys to understand how it works, right? The 3D software will give us the same thing, right? This is the grid of the 3D software. It's attached to my camera, but you will see that like the planes that we have, I tried to make like this little object here show up, but doesn't show up that well. But like you can see that little dot there, it's mirroring this one. And the only difference here is that the mid plane, the center plane, is not actually there, the center line, because we are not seeing the grid, right? But if I take a cube and I conveniently align it to the red line, just so it will be more visible, and you will understand that this thing does exactly, like the 3D software does exactly what we were doing. So I took a couple of screenshots of this scene, one with the grid and the other one without, right? And the idea is that if everything that we did was correct, what we did over there, right, of finding the equivalent point and then going across and finding that point there and going across and finding this point there, in theory, this X should be on the center line. If the center of our cube is aligned with the center line, then when you hide it, you'll find that, oh, it actually is the very center line of everything. And on this cube, the point that is equivalent to the very center of the world is actually on the center of the cube, because that's how Blender does things. If I have my cube sitting here, the equivalent point to the center line would be the bottom of the cube. If I have it over here, the equivalent point is the top point, right? And you don't need to have a grid all the time, because if you have this thing here, you can establish your own grid, right? You can find out what the grid is based on this I'm using the line tool to do this. It's very handy. It's set to pixels, so it just like draws pixels for you. Like you can, I think this one is a bit wonky. Yeah, I missed the top part. But the idea is that as long as you have something to base it off of, you can find the grid and find the equivalent points on that grid. And since a lot of this is relative and it's arbitrary, you can establish that like, I don't want to use this center line. I want to use a center line that is actually based on the top line here. So you just find out that this is the center line there, right? You don't need to necessarily use the relationships that the 3D gave you if you want to sketch something. Now, what I want to do is, let's see, is it here? Yes. Okay. So based on all of that, I want to sketch something to show you guys how to actually apply this without going crazy and write 1,000 lines. So I have some references for me here. I've been like watching some videos on like the Le Mans race, but as we know, designing with just one kind of reference is too boring. So I want to ask you guys to give me another reference. Give me another idea to mix up with this thing.
Okay.
I'm already telling you, I'll draw a spaceship because I don't want to draw wheels, okay?
Like it can be anything, like an animal, right? Or
it can be literally anything.
I was thinking of some ellipses, like maybe some turbines or something. I don't know. It's still mechanical, but
throw in an eagle.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Or something. Eagle with an F1. I don't know.
Maybe
let me find out.
Give them some wings or something.
Yeah.
And a beak.
Cool references here.
And claws.
No, I'll think about the beak, but you can
Fuck
still
the
make
claws.
it. Okay.
Not aerodynamic enough. Actually, yeah.
Okay, a turbine here. And then, do you have a specific type of eagle in mind? Or
like a falcon or just an American bald eagle.
Yeah.
Is this American enough? America! Yeah! Okay. Now, these are references. This is exactly the kind of process that I would do personally when I'm sketching something. The only difference that I will like have here, just to point out to people how to extract the grid if they are not comfortable with just coming with their own grid, right? I would take a photo that you like. So like this photo has multiple perspective grids that you can use. Just because the idea here is that you can take any of these cars and draw something on the same position as them, right? So if you're a beginner and you don't know where to start, I would start by taking a pre-established image and just like, I want to draw a car in this position, and just like extract the grid out of that car, or this one, and so on. I do have a favorite one on this page. I like how the angle of the red one is looking. So I'll extract that one. And again, if I was doing this personally by hand, I would just start sketching. But for the sake of the demonstration, right? Let's do the lines here. And if you hold space, you can move this line around, just for the people that don't know that about the tool. So it's
I didn't even know
quite
that.
useful. Oh, there you go.
So now I know.
Yeah, I can tell we don't use this tool quite enough, like since we tend to go like a lot more organic and less precise than what you usually do. We don't usually frequent these tools, so we definitely appreciate the tips.
It's definitely like something that for sketches is like overly precise, but I'd rather show people like, this is overkill, and then you'll never use it, than to like be, because now you know, right? Like if you ever need to use it, you will know how to. Now, if you try to, if I'm explaining what I'm doing, right, I'm finding the lines on the car that we can assume they are straight, right? So like these on the back are useful. I've tried to find elements that are actual mirrors of each other. So the headlights, they are usually on the same position, right? Just mirrored across. There are a couple of elements that are not, but if you can find those straight elements, they will help give you guidance. And I'll try to be as precise as possible, but again, not killing yourself over it. And one line that's always good to extract from cars is like the ground plane there. Just because that's like a very basic line that you know for sure will be straight. And then you just draw these as many as you feel like. And from here, like for me, this is enough. Okay, kill the drawing, and now we have a grid all yours for you to draw on top of. The way that I would draw, I like to, I started drawing by using markers, right? So I have this cool marker brush from Kyle Webster. I think you guys can, if you want to grab this exact same brush, you go on top of the brush menu here and you click get more brushes. That will take you to the Adobe page of brushes, and it will over there you can find like not only this but multiple other sets. I like the marker set. I think the dry media one is also pretty cool because some nice pencils, like whatever you're into. Doesn't really matter. I just like the look of this because it's how I sketch traditionally as well, and it has like a pretty cool look to it. Now, when I'm doing this, I'm thinking of mostly the shapes. Like the perspective drawing is not really the actual challenge, but if you guys are doing it for the first time, I will try to recognize the shapes and then try to draw them as precisely as possible here, even on your rough sketch, because this is the time to make all of those 10,000 lines to mirror things, so that when you do a cleanup pass, you actually can draw like a nice and clean design. Right? Now, these cars have this nice canopy thing, which we can kind of like take a look at the eagle there. It has this forward neck looking thing. Let me actually think about the design, right? So forward neck, the wings. So we want some wings on the sides. We want the forward neck thing. I also like how the cars have like this little two, the front wheels are covered. So they almost feel like they are the claws that Adrian wanted.
He's starting to regret asking us now.
Not a chance in the world, dude.
Here's your damn wings too. Oh yeah, and the beak.
Well, it's still pretty integrable for a car, so I think the wings and beak or the claws can still work with the bodily proportions of the car. Yes.
Yeah, look, honestly, I would never thought of this, but it's actually like, it will look cool. It's just, it is a challenge to make, right? So this is kind of like a client work. You never know the idea that they will come up with, but you have it's your job to draw it. So
I know this probably doesn't have much to do with perspective, but could you talk for a little bit of like not letting the reference influence your design so much? Because you could feel quite tempted to imitate maybe the rough shape of that car that you're using in the reference or something. I know you've already removed the initial image, so you're no longer painting on top of the image because you've only extracted you've only extracted the perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
But perhaps some people might be letting that initial design guide their next lines a little bit, and let's say clouding their own ideas.
I think the main thing that you need to keep in mind, and like, what is the goal of each reference, right? Actually pick them based on like have a reason for you to be picking the references.
Yeah, because you can check the perspective, you can extract only the lighting, you can extract only the colors, right?
Yeah, you can. What I like to do is, like, if I'm using something for a perspective grid, I would use it only for that, right? So as soon as I have the grid, do away with that photo. You can even, like, let me find let me see. You can find photos that have nothing to do with the subject matter, right? So it will force you to, like, not follow that. So let me see.
Yeah, like you can probably take a picture of your desk and use it as a template for build like a city or something.
Like, you could use like this and sketch like a spaceship. I know I always talk about spaceships, right? But the idea is that, like, this is the grid, right?
Yeah.
And then you can sketch like a landing spaceship, like here, like in relation to that ground and whatever. And this can be at any scale that you want to. It's good if you have a reference that is of like an object that's similar scale as the one that you want to draw, just because it makes it more easy to relate and easy to make sure that you have a good like scale reference. So if you have a human being there, it's also cool. I kind of want to like round this on the back here and then come up with because it's something they have in common, right? They have the back wing there. So I almost want to like flare it out as the eagle has, but then like from here go to the car wing. So it's kind of like doing something along these lines. And then if it doesn't fit, right, what do? You take both of them and just like scale it down. Now it fits. Magic. Let me see. I do like the idea of the wings going back a little bit, maybe. Now, one thing that I want you guys to notice is that whatever shape I'm drawing, I'm starting from the center, and then I'm flaring it out, because that comes from the perspective round. That comes from the fact that, oh, if I want to mirror something, I need to know like where it lands on the center line. So I'm all the time thinking of the relationship between the lines. Like if I know that this is this, and I want to go back, right? Oh, this is where it meets the center line, and then I need to go back. This is where it meets that line, So like, it's a bit off, right? This is not exactly there, so I can make it more precise if I want to. But the idea is that you know where things land. That's the overall idea, just so it looks as if it had any sense of proportion, right? As if it had any sense of perspective. Now, talking about design a little bit, right? The one thing that is not quite working here, like these are all the same size, and that doesn't feel good. So what I'm thinking of, it's adding this little in-between shape here, because that in-between shape kind of merges both of these, and it will give you the beak that Adrian was asking for. Right. So imagine that Adrian is the client that comes out with an idea that you're like, why the hell would you do that?
Because it's an eagle.
And too many changes.
Yeah. Yo, Adrian, is the 10th change that you asked just this week, dude? Can't you just be satisfied?
No, Andre, you don't understand. It has to have a beak. It's an eagle.
I'm not paying you money.
Yeah, exactly. Then I'm not paying you.
Dang, that's a great point. I better do the beak then.
Make it work somehow. That's why I hired you.
Oof. It
like,
is indeed.
Hey, can you do paint over for me, Adrian? Draw over. You ask the client. No, I can't help you at all.
I can't help you if you don't help yourself, guys. Come on. Oh, and now we are starting to get somewhere, you know, like now it's where the design's starting to.
It has to be good. Pink. And you must use
we don't have a pink car over here.
And you gotta use the Comic Sans font type.
Yeah,
imagine
that's where I draw the line.
Yeah,
this kind of reminds me of like an Egyptian pharaoh, ancient Egyptian.
Right. It has those vibes.
Vehicle.
It's the nice curves.
Let's put the little like chin thing, you know,
pointy shapes. Yeah,
very sick.
Yeah,
yellow scheme.
Yeah, I think this is kind of like good for a sketch already. Yeah, go ahead, Adrian.
I just wanted to say, when you practice these things long enough, like the ultra technical stuff you've presented for the first half of the video, do you get to a point where you can, I don't mean to say skip that part and get straight into the sketching thing while still doing it under a correct perspective, let's say, but do you always start with like this type of let's say, do you sketch in perspective every time, or do you ever start with like flat view, like top view or side view first, and then translate it into like some isometric view?
Okay, so
for design wise, I mean, you know,
kind of like half and half. I would say that you never don't think about it, right? But for design's sake, like this is kind of like fun drawings, right? These are sketching straight like this. It's cool for, I don't know, Instagram post, or if a client wants something that looks finished right out of the gate, right? But what I like to do first is a flat, like 2D drawing, just like side view. So if I was actually coming up with this from scratch and I wanted to be like the best design possible ever, I would probably like start with the side view and like figure out proportions. And from here, I'll take this side view and then like, let's put it like on a perspective grid. And this perspective grid can be like something that you made yourself, or you extracted from a photo or from 3D or whatever. And then you can like start drawing, right? Because then you do have your center line, or you can take this side view to the 3D software and do like a block out, and from there take to the next step.
Exactly, because one thing I used to do is to draw like the top view and then transform it with like distorting it in Photoshop to have like the ground plane, and then build on top of it since it's already in perspective, right? You're kind of like extruding it upwards, let's say.
Yeah, the one thing that I would say for people to be careful about when they're doing that sort of thing is that when you're doing your side view sketch, remember that things have thicknesses, right? So what usually happens, especially with props, is that like people will draw, let's say, the side view of the pistol, right? So this is like side view of a pistol here, whatever. And they'll put this into perspective, and then like the only thing that they'll do is like sketch it super square, and then this surface here doesn't have anything, right? And then this surface here is just like a rectangle. And remember that
you called me out.
Remember that things have different thicknesses, right? Like the handle is a bit more round, and it's probably like narrower towards the front of the handle than towards the back. The like trigger guard is like thinner than the handle, right? So it like fits in a different way. Otherwise, you are just like having straight up like extrusions, and you don't want just extrusions. You want things that are interesting. So if you're extruding, let's say, since I use the trigger guard as an example, right? Let's say that you have this shape here, and this is your trigger guard. Why not like have, I don't know, a break here, you know, like a relief thing.
And bevels and stuff, right?
Now you can't see this break. You can't see the break from the side view, because the side view only sees these, right? But it's interesting if you do those. It's like you are designing it from multiple different views. That's why the side view or the sketch or whatever is just the beginning, and the end goal is always like a 3D object, right?
One thing I remember they told me like years ago is that objects in real life don't usually have like an extremely sharp edge, you know? And I'm saying this regarding what you're just showing there, you know, like things usually have like a little bit of a bevel kind of thing. Like the edges are sometimes a little more soft. It's not always like a straight line and that's it, you know. And you can usually see this probably in like more beginner type of 3D work, where people just leave those things like as sharp as they can be, and you can tell the difference,
You'd
right?
be surprised, man. There's a lot of actually professional work being done like that as well. It's like, I'm not calling anyone out, but you see a lot that, like, if you go on ArtStation.
No, but
see, like,
I'm saying like
right?
final stuff, you know, final props, final whatever you want to call it.
That's something I learned in art school.
Not for concept, you know, like I'm saying like the final thing.
Rounding off the corners. Yeah. Because in real life, nothing is super sharp.
And even like with vehicles, if you're sketching something and you want them to look like extra aggressive, right? Sometimes you would sketch something that is a very fine point, right? So at the end here, I could just like do this, right? And be a beak, and just like Adrian's beak, right?
Now I know you like that beak.
How do you write beak? I don't know how to write beak.
B-E-A-K.
Yeah, like that.
Okay. But yeah, like, it's the subtle thing, right? Is doing the little round corner there that will give the drawing a little bit more of that extra push in realism that people don't often do, right? And even if you want the drawing to feel more sharp and aggressive and all of that, it's good to like do those indications. Kind of like this secondary line that I'm drawing here. This is to show that this edge here has actually a thickness to it, right? It's not like a razor fine edge, right?
Yeah, that's what I meant. That's a great way to put it. At this point, I know I'm going to make it into the thumbnail of the video.
Oh, dude, don't do that. I will not be able to look at the video afterwards. Now, this line looks a bit weird, and it was better on the
Hey,
sketch,
Dom came up with the eagle thing, so don't blame it on me.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is exactly what he had in mind.
Yo, I gotta say, the ship is looking so dope. It's kind of insane how fast
like manta ray vibes with eagle vibes with
some
anteater vibes.
Yeah, some at this point, stuff. The goal is just like wrap it up and find like different ways to make the design better. So one thing that I noticed on the drawing is like this portion here, it's like things were getting too evenly proportioned. So like you can make things a bit smaller, a bit bigger, like add some extra details. This is usually like the very chill portion of the design process, just because you have like overall proportions figured out and you're just enjoying your time and making sure that things look tight, right? Now, is the perspective completely gone now? Not really, but you can also be a lot more relaxed about it, just because you already know what you're doing. And all of those mirroring details that I talked about earlier, they are still in place, right? Because I need to find out like, oh, will I be able to see like this thing on the other side, right? I draw the center line. I arch this thing like across the center line here. I mirror over there. And then if I'm not like, it's barely not visible, right? I'm like hitting there. But it's good to know, because if I want to make this glass like transparent, right? I can just draw on the other side. And now you can kind of see what's inside there. And if you want to add like a dashboard here, it's encompassing to that. The little cockpit of the guy there. At the chair. You know. All of those extra details, like the pilot there, they can come in if you know exactly what you're doing in terms of the drawing.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks for showing this, because this is usually the stage where you become a little too invested in how tight the drawing must be, you know, and it prevents you from...
At first, yeah.
Yeah.
Instead of loosely sketching, I think it's always a good idea to loosely plan out your ideas first and then line up the lines as you go, because you can always go back, make mistakes, and
maybe
I think this is equivalent to like the. Sorry, just gonna say like we saw Dom painting like a bunch of scenes already on Lightshare Labs, which is another one of our series. If you guys are interested, like go and watch someone that actually knows how to paint do it. But the cool thing about those, like, they almost always, if not always for sure, start with the black and white. The marker sketch is the black and white, you know. The marker sketch is the initial stage. Everything has like the equivalent version on their own like subsection of design and art and all of that. So
yeah, I was just gonna say that sometimes those words from the client can overrun you, and you kind of keep them in mind so much that you kind of lose, I don't know,
the gesture.
Yeah, and it becomes ultra tight, you know, the painting.
Stiff.
And exactly, yeah, very stiff. You no longer have that flexibility to explore freely and just push and pull shapes and stuff like that. And one more thing I wanted to... Sorry, go ahead, Doug.
Go ahead. I was going to also say that when a client is asking you to draw or paint in your style, do your style, you know? Because sometimes you might have like a prerequisite in your mind of like, oh, I need to match this certain artist style. Don't try to copy like the other artist. Just try to do what you do best, you know? Because that takes all the pressure off of trying to match exactly.
Yeah, because ideally they
won't be as stiff.
They hire you to do your thing, the way you do things.
Yeah.
And one more thing I wanted to ask, Andre, is would you now, like in the next stage of this, let's say you clean up everything, all the lines are perfect and stuff, do you take this to like the 3D stage? Do you bring this into another, like a software, like 3D software like Blender or whatever else, and then
ZBrush.
render or overpaint afterwards?
Yeah. So yeah, the way that I would do it, let's say that I wanted to start with a sketch like this and I really like the sketch, right? And now it's the time to show that none of this perspective is actually precise, right? Because when you bring it to 3D, that's when you actually find out. We can cover that a lot at a later episode, like more precisely. But what I would do, like I would save this image here. And then I would, I need to save it to bring it here. But basically I would attach the image to the camera and then put it at a lower opacity. And then I would find out where that perspective lands. So I would kind of like take a cube here and maybe like stretch it and probably like do,
start blocking out.
I would do
the shape.
I would do a similar shape that I know I have on my sketch, just so I could align the grid that I have on the drawing with the drawing itself. That's actually, let's do that on the next episode, because then I can save this very sketch and take that into 3D and show you guys how we do it. But if it's a finished piece, like something that I do want to take for sure to a final, that's what I would do. These days, that's probably like the one thing that I would do the most, like the pros that I would take. It's my like established workflow, because the 2D drawings, like the side view drawings, they're fun and all, but they're not really like, I don't usually take them straight to 3D. I usually like to do these things just because I like the visuals, you know, like that's more of a stylistic choice than a actually good design decision. If you guys are designing things and you have a good side view, just take that to 3D. Don't be like old and like old fashioned like I am, you know, just do the better route. But I always love like the people like Do Chang, Mikko Kus, Feng Zhu that have like sketches, or even George Hole, that he still like does traditional sketching, you know, like with actual markers and stuff. So that's my inspiration. But for props nowadays, this is probably like too slow for the industry. and you might want to invest in a workflow that uses all of the knowledge that you gather, like on these perspective things, and apply that to a faster workflow.
How much are those references still helping you at this point?
I mean, I take a look at every now and then. So, like, one thing, and it's very abstract, right? Because
now what are you looking at? Like the shapes, the curves, the flow, the rhythm in the shapes, or something?
The tiny details.
Like, it's very small on the screen, but to me, like, I have a large screen in front of me, so it's quite big actually. I was looking at these yellow parts here. Yeah, I just want to like show how big it is like on the screen, and then I was looking at this yellow part here when I was drawing this top surface there.
That's what.
And the cool thing that they have is like they are angled, and they have this like indent here that is a form change between the bottom surface and the top one. And what I did is like, oh, it would be cool if these lines here, instead of like just being straight and boring, they were angled, and they have a gap between them and the bottom surface there. So that it's kind of like multi-level, right? This kind of like fades into this bigger shape, and then it fades again to have sort of an echo. So this part here is actually much thicker than the wing that is right below it. Or another thing that I was looking at is like how the like these parts here, you can see like you have the I think this is like the suspension bar or something on this line here, or just a winglet that guides the air. Probably a winglet that guides the air towards the intakes a little bit better. But the cool thing about this is that the wheel cover kind of, okay, so the way that I see it, it's kind of like doing, this is the wheel cover thing, and that little piece is sitting kind of like here. So the wheel cover kind of encompasses it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I got the idea of these parts here kind of going into the intake, and the intake going underneath it as well. So you'll be able to see that going in. On a painted version of this, like this line would extend like all the way to the inside. So you don't actually see where it ends, which looks better than just like this extra harsh line here, right? And just stops, like this kind of like fades in, and you'll see just the shadow line here. Kind of catching that. And maybe a little bit of the end there. But at this point, it's basically like looking at the references, seeing what you can take from there and not. I do also, like, I'm a big fan of motorsports, so I do have things that are already like having the back of my head as little pieces of cars, little pieces of like race cars, drag cars, F1 cars, all of that. So I use those quite a bit as well when I'm sketching, because there are details that just give that extra hint of like making it grounded, right? And if you know a little bit more about the subject that you're drawing, it makes it extra easy. And that's why like I'm doing this for the demo, right? It's more of my comfort zone, more of like things that I'm not a mechanic, but I understand a little bit about the cars, so it's fun for me to do it. But you can always just like study a different subject and then apply that, like do perspective drawing, applying the knowledge that you gain on a study or something. Like that's always something cool to do as well.
No, but I totally understand what you mean.
Creatures,
it definitely helps to have some, knowledge as a background for the design you're doing, because it helps you to understand a little bit more about what your, let's say, intent is with the design, and comprehending those mechanical aspects of it, maybe, or the anatomy of what you're building, kind of helps you better understand what you're creating. So yeah, let's say it provides you with a layer of logic to it, perhaps.
Yeah, it just gives you extra information. Now, look, this is another point where, we are talking about design, right? Because this changed a little bit into the design talk, but we can cover this later on as well on a different talk just about this. But check this out, like this is the same size, roughly the same size as this. And I'm almost making the third one being the same size. So right now what's going through my head is like, I need to make that extra one, either like a giga thing or like a tiny one. You know?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask
just
you
so
how
I don't have.
how would you distribute those proportions now to make them?
I would actually make it like more subtle right now, just so
the wings, right?
I don't think the wings I think are a good size. I just think the little tips there are a bit much. The center one, it's good just because it's the
yeah, it's supposed to be
the main one,
the biggest. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's fine. But and look, this is another point. Like I'm dragging that line there all the way to the center line of my vehicle, just so I can find where the line lands and kind of like drag it across this. And then because I haven't drew anything there yet, I can just erase those lines. And what this kind of stuff will give you, it's a bunch of these like super scratchy little lines that to me are very appealing. I know people that hate them. I know people that like want the cleanest drawing possible.
I honestly like it this way.
Yeah,
like
I like even like
layers.
The only thing that I would remove is the red drawing. I like this, you know, like this.
Yeah,
to
exactly.
Me, it's kind of like the cool looking thing, you know. But yeah, I'll still add the little tip there. It's just make it like very small. And another thing that I'll do is like I'll make the wing kind of like be thicker here than on the tip, so you can drag the line, make it thicker over there, like this a bit thinner. But yeah, this is how you use those mirror techniques to actually sketch something.
Thanks for this, man.
Yeah, I'm gonna finish this drawing. I'm gonna put it on a sped up version, and you guys stick around to see how this comes out at. So thank you very much, everyone. Watch all of our other content as well. I think we just launched an episode recently that talks about how to keep a daily habit. This kind of sketching is pretty much how I do it. These guys have also awesome advice about that, so go check it out. And we'll see you guys next time.
See you guys.
See you guys.
See ya.
Bye-bye.